If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at duluthnewstribune.com/podcasts. That's duluthnewstribune.com/podcasts.
Hello, Northlanders. It's Tuesday, September 12th. I'm Wyatt Buckner with your Duluth News Tribune Minute, presented by Minnesota Power Employees Credit Union.
The average MPECU member saves over $785 a year in better rates and lower fees. And with MPECU, every ATM is your ATM. With their free checking program, you get ATM fee reimbursements at any ATM anywhere in the U.S. Check out Minnesota Power Employees Credit Union's services online at mpecu.com or visit their offices in downtown Duluth, Arrowhead Road, or Miller Trunk Highway.
Now here's a look at today's headlines. Duluth City Councilors voted 8-0 Monday night to lower the fines earlier proposed to charge people who choose to vape or smoke, whether it be marijuana or tobacco, in public parks. It is still against the law to light up or use a vaping device in a city park, but instead of facing a petty misdemeanor charge and up to a $300 fine as initially expected, those who disregard the ban will be charged $25 for a first violation, $50 for a second, and $75 for a third or subsequent transgression. Azreen Owl, Councilor at Large, earlier had expressed concerns about the passage of an ordinance that forbids the smoking or vaping of cannabis or other substances in any city parks, citing a potential impact on minorities. She and 2nd District Councilor Mike Mayo successfully offered an amendment that reduced the originally proposed fines. Owl noted that any violation would still be accompanied with an additional $90 court filing fee. At-large Councilor Noah Hobbs previously had encouraged the council to hold off on reducing the smoking fines, suggesting that if the cost of a ticket for smoking is lowered, fines for drinking alcohol in a park should be as well. But Owl noted that a recently passed ordinance banning smoking in all city parks is slated to take effect September 14th, shortly after recreational marijuana use became legal in the state of Minnesota. In light of the timing, she urged her colleagues to act Monday. While Hobbs voted in support of the resolution to reduce the financial penalties for smoking in city parks Monday, he said he still hopes to work with Councilors Mayo and Owl to bring fines for alcohol use in line. Jacob Colt Johnson, a Superior man who fired at least 4 shots that killed his friend in a moving car on Father's Day 2021, and subsequently drove the body several hours north of the Twin Ports and elicited the help of others to dismember and dispose of the remains in Lake Superior, was handed the statutory maximum sentence for second-degree murder. In imposing the 40-year prison term, Judge Michael Kuzo said the case was, quote, so horrific that it's hard to even describe without my stomach churning, end quote. Johnson, who declined to speak at the hearing, mostly looked toward the bench and avoided facing several members of Ricky Balsamo Jr.'s family, as they described an immeasurable level of grief that has shown few signs of subsiding more than 2 years later. Balsamo, a 34-year-old father of 3, was riding in a car with Johnson and 2 women when he was killed. Defense attorneys presented evidence that Balsamo was under the influence of methamphetamine, threatening people and waving around a knife in a manner that caused Johnson to shoot in self-defense. But prosecutors portrayed Johnson as angry and annoyed with the victim, irrationally choosing to shoot without any warning. A Duluth jury agreed in early August, finding Johnson, 37, guilty of both intentional and unintentional murder. Johnson eventually took the body to an RV in rural Douglas County and cut it up with a circular saw, encasing the remains in several 5-gallon buckets and a large tote. He received assistance from a friend, Robert Thomas West, who purchased supplies and helped dispose of evidence. West then drove the remains up the North Shore to Grand Portage and threw the buckets from a fishing boat commissioned by another friend, Tommy Lynn Hintz. Kuzo last month gave West a 15-year sentence for his role, as he was found guilty by a jury in February of aiding an offender as an accomplice to second-degree murder and interference with a dead body. West, 43 of South Range, entered into a post-conviction agreement with the prosecution and testified at Johnson's trial in exchange for having his sentence capped. Hintz, meanwhile, agreed to cooperate in trials of both men and was placed on 5 years of supervised probation as part of a plea agreement to aiding an offender. She was also ordered to serve 2 90-day jail stints, but may have those waived if she maintains sobriety and a productive lifestyle. A pandemic-era spike in violent crimes appears to be easing, but Minnesota still had significantly more murders and aggravated assaults in 2022 than it did 5 years before. After reaching a peak in 2021, Minnesota saw an 8.6% overall decrease in violent crimes in 2022, according to the Uniform Crime Report released Monday by the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. Greater Minnesota saw a 13% decrease, and the 7-county Twin Cities metro saw crime drop by 7%, but the 182 criminal homicides reported in 2022, classified as murder by the agency in its report, is still much higher than what the state saw in 2018 and 2019, the years immediately before the social and economic disruptions that came as COVID-19 arrived in the U.S. Before 2021, Minnesota's highest number of murders was last reported in 1995, when Minneapolis saw a significant surge in violence tied to gangs. That year, there were 183 murders, according to the Department of Public Safety. Minnesota's population has grown by 1.1 million people since the mid-1990s. Murder numbers are now dipping along with overall violent crime, though aggravated assaults, which in the report include attempted murders, also remain much higher than 5 years prior. Dan Williamson now joins us with a special guest.
Thanks, Wyatt. I'm joined by one of our colleagues, the great Jay Gabler, Duluth News Tribune arts and entertainment reporter, and Jay is working on a story that we'll be able to see in Wednesday's print edition of the Duluth News Tribune. And Jay, you were telling me, of course, this is a year where we've had a lot of milestone anniversaries, and what do you know, there's a well-known landmark that has a milestone anniversary. What more can you tell us?
That's right. We have already celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Lake Superior Railroad Museum. And now it is time to say happy birthday on September 29th. The Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center turns 50 this month. That museum has gone by a couple different names that don't sound very different from the one it currently has. So a lot of people just call it still the Marine Museum, or my parents just said the Maritime Museum. But, you know, that museum right down there by the base of the aerial lift bridge that looks like a ship, no coincidence.
In covering this story, what was your biggest takeaway?
Well, the thing that everybody loves to talk about with respect to the origins of this museum is the fact that it got its start because there was a need for bathrooms down there. And that is still the core purpose of that museum. And it was almost kind of touching to talk to the park rangers who staff the museum. They know why people are there. First of all, they've got to go to the bathroom. They're in Canal Park. They need to get that taken care of. But then once they're there, they want to check out the exhibits, some of which have been around for all 50 years and some of which are much newer.
That's awesome. In terms of our audience, what do you hope they take away from your story?
I hope they realize what a small, very dedicated group of people run this museum. It is a free museum right down there at the heart of Duluth's tourist industry. They see 500,000 visitors a year, and it is really just a handful of rangers along with a few dedicated volunteers who make that museum happen and are absolutely dedicated to making it happen as a free resource for not just people who are locals or who are tourists, but they also provide an essential service for the Port Authority. They keep track of the ships coming and going under the aerial lift bridge, not just to let the public know, but actually they're the record keepers for the Port Authority. The Port Authority relies on the rangers to let them know what ships have come and gone through the bridge. So they're really performing an essential service on top of operating this entire museum and, you know, offering bathroom facilities and doing things like reminding people not to feed the gulls and taking care of medical issues. You know, if you fall and you scrape your knee on the pier, there's going to be a ranger there to help you out. So they really do a lot to not just help keep the memory of Duluth's maritime history alive and the living, you know, the activity, sharing the information about the continuing activity of the maritime industry and other activity on Lake Superior, but really, you know, taking care of Duluth residents and visitors in a lot of different ways. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention they are going to be celebrating this 50th anniversary. They're planning a little special something, kind of a birthday party. They're thinking maybe balloons, cake, and, you know, maybe some special surprises on the 28th of this month, September 28th. Details on that are still to be determined. But then also they have the annual Gales of November conference, featuring speakers and all sorts of ways to learn more about the history of maritime activity in Lake Superior. That's coming up in November, and that is really going to be spotlighting the 50th anniversary of the Maritime Visitor Center.
Wow, 50 years young. Thank you so much for your time, Jay.
Thanks, Dan.
And again, you can find this story in Wednesday's print edition of the Duluth News Tribune. You can also find it online prior at duluthnewstribune.com. Wyatt, back to you.
Thanks, Dan. Now here's a look at your forecast, brought to you by Superior Telegram's history podcast, Archive Dive.
Duluth area weather for today, kind of gloomy out there with areas of fog and drizzle and a few scattered rain showers during the morning, staying mostly cloudy through the day with temps only reaching into the low 50s for this afternoon. Tonight we should clear off, temps likely to drop down to around the upper 30s, near 40 around the lake, probably a little cooler than that with some scattered areas of frost away from the lake tonight. Then for tomorrow, sunny with a high in the low 60s. Winds will be light through the period. Later in the week, I do expect to warm up with 70s by Thursday. I'm Storm Tracker meteorologist John Wheeler.
Thank you to Archive Dive for their support. The monthly history podcast, hosted by Superior Telegram reporter Maria Lockwood, dips into the archives of historic events, people, and places around Superior and Douglas County. You can find the latest episode of Archive Dive at superiortelegram.com or wherever you also get this podcast. Reporting for today's episode was done by Peter Passy, Tom Olson, and Alex DeRozier. Thank you for listening to the Duluth News Tribune Minute. Have a great day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.